Hello, everyone, and welcome to Schmidt List Live. I am your host, Kurt Schmidt, president and partner at Foundry, and I am very excited for today's conversation. And before I jump into it, obviously, I do have to do my little mention that we are hiring at Foundry. So check out foundrymakes.com/careers. Tell a friend, tell two friends, tell everybody you know, tell them all. Tell them all we're hiring and we'll be happy to have you. So please welcome my guest, Sonny. Oh, there he's missing. There he is. Hey, Sonny. How you doing?
Good. Good to be on the show.
Good. Thanks for joining me. So you're in New York. You did some traveling, huh?
Yeah, we recently opened up an engineering office here in Minneapolis in New York City, and just traveling to see the team here. It's good
Fun.
to see kind of an offshoot. Yeah.
That's great. So tell me, Sonny, how did you get into technology? Did you trip and fall into it like the rest of us? Or was it the plan always from a wee child to grow up and build a service and product company someday?
Yeah, the cute story is that, my mom takes credit for it. She was a computer science graduate student at the University of Minnesota, and we had an old IBM Tandy at home, and I learned BASIC there and hung out in her computer labs, and one of her lab mates taught me C and C++ and wrote some video games when I was a kid. So I just tooled around. Like, I was the guy who was pretending not to be a nerd, but at home I was just building computers and writing stuff. So nothing serious. Like, I didn't ever really grow into a software engineering role. Primarily, it was mostly still just me tooling around with friends. But that's really where I got the connections that allowed me to start the company in the first place. So,
okay, so that's was it kind of did I've seen it with agencies before that some are purposefully created and some you kind of you back into because you build up a network and a client list and you see the demand, and so now you need to fill the demand, where other people are more like, okay, this is what we're going to do. This is the plan. This is all the things. Which way did your agency go?
For us, we set out to build a product. My co-founder was one of the first engineers on the Google Plus project, and his roommate was the CEO of Mixpanel. And so he had a very strong desire for building a product company and very little to no desire for building a consulting firm.
Sure.
And so it just took a lot longer. Like, there's a piece of paper that I keep floating around where it's like a high level business plan. And I was like, custom software agency, 1.5 years. And of course it took like 4.5 years to do all the work that we needed to do to get to where we are, to get to the point where we could switch into product. But that was the plan from the beginning. I wouldn't say that the consulting work was a distraction by any means. I think we learned a lot about people. We learned a lot about product building. But it was just that we had a higher level of personal excellence than we wanted to give up. And that means that you're going to do a little extra work without billing for it, and it's going to take a little extra longer. And that means you're going to make a little extra money, which means that you need to save up a little bit more to do your product conversion. And it just all cascaded onto a few more years. But I don't regret it at all.
So you mentioned you kind of came up with this initial plan. Was the plan to consistently work on the product from the get-go, or was it something where once we reached a certain milestone, now we could focus on it? Or was it the number of years mainly because it was just hard to balance both things?
Yeah, I think it's all three, actually, not to have a cop-out answer. But
no, that's a good answer.
If you look around at our space, most of the people that are working on anything are at companies that are 20, 30, 40 years old. And so that was the biggest like warning flag. Like, we should be spending a lot of time here, right? Because something is preventing innovation from happening. So for us, it was a paranoia that we're missing something, and we were missing a lot of things we didn't learn until we worked with these customers. Okay. But what you said, that balance, it really isn't a balance. I'm not sure what the Foundry early story looks like, but for us, some weeks we were barely making payroll because some big company forgot to process some, payables payment to us, and what was a small amount of money for them was huge for us. And so obviously we had to do whatever we needed to do to push forward on milestones to get someone to pay attention, to pay us, and
Yep.
that it doesn't make for a very good product development experience when you're constantly worried about where's our next meal coming from at certain times, right? So I wouldn't call it a balance, more like a feast and famine type of a thing. And sometimes we'd have really good projects, or there'd be a big payment at the end, and we'd have $1 million in the account, and we'd ride that out for 2 or 3 months. We would work on the product. But of course, consulting projects takes months to close, and so
Yeah.
then we'd have
Yep.
to make sure that we're selling early. And I'm not
Yep.
telling you anything new, but
Sure.
for us, that was the balance that we went through. So
Yeah, I like I said, the challenge I've seen is, if you get stuck in that sort of mode, being opportunistic, it can throw off the plan. Do you feel like the product changed a lot because of the longer life cycle it took to kind of get it to the market you wanted to get it to?
yeah, for sure. I think originally, and I'm still a pretty big Paul Graham and Y Combinator disciple, but that
Yeah.
method of building something very small that somebody wants, that's what we started with. And
Okay.
we built something really small that people wanted. But the problem with it is that we had to integrate it with some big behemoth system that existed, and that took a long time. So
Yep.
really that approach was fundamentally unscalable. And then it was like, what is the minimum threshold of complexity we have to build that could be
Mm,
successful? And that was just so much higher than we expected. And that required us to build more and find more customers, and build more and build more and build more. So I think that we would have failed had we just set out to do it in the way that we wanted to. We would have raised too little money. We would have built something
mm,
too small. It would have been unscalable. So in that regard, I think it saved us from 2 or 3 pivots. But yeah, that's what took so long.
yeah, makes sense. So then, in terms of structure, because you're well versed in organizational structures. How did the company have to change, or how has it changed in terms of moving from a more consulting base to a product base? Obviously, the customer base is very different, but how did you have to address that in staffing?
Yeah, from a consulting standpoint, our philosophy is very much getting every one of our engineers as close to direct access to the customer as possible. So some of
Yep.
even the larger projects, there wasn't really like an account manager or whatever you might call it. The
Mm-hmm.
engineer was directly listening to the actual customer who's requesting the work. And so from a sales standpoint, we tried to lay out our relationships in a way where they could trust us. So we maybe had some digital marketing stuff, we maybe had some website development stuff, things to establish that trust before we did anything big. And even when customers came to us and said, hey, we want to do this $1 million project, we'd have them start with something smaller, build that trust
Right.
so that we would be able to minimize the scaffolding. We wanted kind of this minimum achievable hierarchy in that organizational structure. And that autonomy, I think, from an engineer or anybody who's creative, just feels incredible, right? Like you
Mm-hmm.
can recruit on that emotion alone. Since building a product, obviously, as you start to scale, Trevor, one of my best friends, his time at Google, he gave me this number, square root of n. As you hire people, when you're building a product, the speed, the velocity of development doesn't increase linearly. It doesn't increase n. For every n people you hire, you get square root of n improved velocity. And so that stuff goes to documentation and test suites and all
Yeah.
these things that are boring things that you wouldn't do potentially for a small custom project that might just be for like a marketing thing or whatever. They might
Sure.
be cool, but you just wouldn't do it. So I think once you start adding that in, it's not an incremental calculus. It becomes this kind of reiterative calculus where it's okay, now we need to have this resource, which means that they have to communicate, and that means we have to have opportunities for them to communicate. Then we have to add all these different meetings and stuff like that. So rebalancing it didn't kind of move incrementally. It had to move in like quantum steps, and each one of those steps really hurt, actually, right? It
Sure.
feels to somebody that you're pulling away autonomy. But as you grow in size, you have to reduce autonomy to increase alignment at some stages. And we're still trying to get as much autonomy for everyone as possible. But the overall agency and autonomy per person was probably as maximum as it could be in our consulting practice. And it's just less now. It's probably one order of magnitude better than other product companies, I would say, but
Uh-huh.
it's still less than full autonomy, right?
Okay. That makes sense. Yeah, because I think in terms of that, that makes sense from an engineering. Let's talk about the customer side of things, because as you mentioned, in a consulting business, it takes months and lots of relationships to, lots of relationship building to get those projects in the door, get working on them. Whereas in a product, people might assume that it's a bit more transactional. It's a bit more like, flipping a light switch. What's been your experience, and how have you adjusted going from more of that relationship customer support to more of a transactional support, or more of a help desk support, I guess?
Well, on the consulting side of things, what we found was you're not selling software, you're selling an idea.
Right.
It's somewhat
Right.
similar to an advertising agency, and you can't really sell a good idea unless you really fundamentally understand the customer or the client. And so our sales process was very, very inquisitive, very discovery based, lots and lots of meetings about what are your metrics like, what are your problems, what is it
Mm-hmm.
costing you, why are you doing this, like challenging them on why do this, because we were burned once with this customer. They paid us a couple $100,000 retainer. They were super gung-ho. We didn't know much about them, and some unknown internal politics shut the project down, and we were stuck having allocated all these resources. We got some money, but like that wasn't nearly the same proportional scale as what we staffed up to be, right? So
Right.
we didn't learn that by some book, or we learned that like the hard way. Okay, we really have to understand where we're delivering value, so if
Yeah.
something happens, we can rescue the project, right? So I think we've kept a lot of that in the product side of things. We're still very much inquisitive about the product, utilization in the company, who's going
Mm-hmm.
to use it, what is it costing you to stay on your current platform, why move to Fulcrum, why is it significantly better, is it significantly better, and we train our SDRs and our AEs to be as challenging and as consultative as possible in that sale, and as relational as possible. And that kind of is the tail that wags the dog in
Mm-hmm.
every other subsequent process and implementation in customer success. Now we want that to be single point of contact. There is no help desk. There's a certain person, and that person's email forwards to another person that you develop a relationship with throughout the entire process. In customer success, which we're just adding right now, also will be very relational, very
Mm.
nurturing, very warm. And so no help desk, no 1-800
No,
number,
no
no
ticketing
escalation,
system.
no ticketing. There's some internal ticketing that happens,
Sure.
but
Yeah. Yeah.
it should
Yeah.
feel like you're asking a friend or a very
Mm-hmm.
responsible nephew to help you set up your computer, and that person's over in a couple hours and really wants
Yeah.
to help grandma because they're just the best kid ever. Like that's the experience we want to give. And I think that is something that has served us really well in the product side of things. So
Yeah, and you probably get a lot more honest feedback as well in that process. That is so valuable. It's invaluable, getting that feedback from people, because they're going to be honest with you on what it works and what doesn't work. When they're transactional, they're not that willing to give you feedback. They're just going to shut it down and say thanks, but no thanks.
mhm.
So let's talk about maintaining that vision, because one of the things that I've seen product companies struggle with, especially in the last few years, because you'd mentioned integrations, and so I have to touch on the idea of customization and the idea of making something that fits for a specific company so you can get in the door there, and those types of things. How have you kept focus through the build of the product? Because I've seen a lot of other products go in crazy directions because they, some big Fortune 10 company was going to integrate their thing. But if they just changed a third of the platform, how have you approached that?
For us as a company internally, we talk a lot about is this going to help us change the way the world works or not?
Okay.
And so we might be able to change the way one particular business works, or maybe one sub industry. But if we can make everyone improve in a much more like one to many relationship, that was the whole thesis behind moving from a consulting firm to a product company. We could go and consult with company by company and change them one at a time, but we have this unique and rare, and what as a child I thought there were just unlimited opportunities, but we've stumbled upon this unique opportunity to actually do a one to many relationship. And so there's a sacredness to that helps
Mm.
us anchor our vision, that this isn't something that should be taken lightly. This isn't something that just appears every single day. And if we're not good stewards of this opportunity, we'll all regret it for the rest of our lives. So we try to put really high stakes on a lot of things as we're talking about it. I think another thing too is, for me at least, introspectively, to have patience. Like, the demand for the product grows and we want it to grow really fast, but we also want to make sure we're making the right decisions instead of just chasing the ability
Hmm.
to like ingest that demand, right?
Growth
They
for
say all the
growth's
time
sake.
that, yeah, exactly. Like, a good startup dies of indigestion, not of starvation, right? So
Hmm.
how do you have the patience to really chew your food and swallow it instead of trying to ingest everything as quickly as possible?
Yeah, no, I get it. And because again, I've seen so many of these places build from, oh, somebody would use this. And so let's make that thing. And what you talked about is more of a dent in the universe that you want to make versus an application that for businesses. And I think that's a big differentiator in the startups. And a lot of the founders that I talk to, that's a lot of the coaching that I end up doing is, why are you doing this? And they're like, well, because it's a great idea. And I'm like, yeah, but why? Why is it a great idea? And you do that kind of 5 why thing, right? Where you're trying to get to the core idea and what that impact is going to be. What kind of life do you want this to create? And I think people who are following that, to your point, the pivots make a lot of sense because they're following the dream and not the dollar.
Yep. And I think that the job is hard in a way
Yeah.
that it isn't tactile. I always assume that it'd be hard in like doing work and staying long hours, and that's fine, and it has happened. But I think the hardest thing is there are these moments, these ethereal moments of you literally just had the biggest success ever, but you're
Mm-hmm.
left feeling empty because what if the ceiling is much lower than I thought? Or like, what if I'm actually really close to like not growing faster anymore? And
Mm.
the, in a spreadsheet, the
What if that's
difference
the
between
best it's
like,
ever going to get?
yeah, exactly, right. The difference between an incredible company and a mediocre one is just a couple percentages of month over month growth on some pro forma, and that seems so abstract and so out of control, and it really is, right.
Hmm.
And so I think the thing that you have to like that I didn't understand before, that if I were to talk to myself from like 5 years ago, is that you have to have luck not just once but a billion times
Mm.
sequentially throughout the entire process. And I think that was the hardest thing to struggle with. And if I didn't have that, like I could actually change something usefully so that after I'm dead, it's still progressing on a different trajectory. I after a few bad lucks that perseverance was the right thing to do, I might have given up. Right. So I
Hmm.
think that for me, at least for my personality style, it needs to be something really, really big and really potentially important. So.
Yeah. Well, in terms of that, you're kind of, I'm guessing there was a point where you were really, one foot on either side of the chasm, right? I mean, you're really doubling down on the product stuff, but you have a project blowing up with a consulting thing, and I can see how some serious self-care needs to go into being able to handle that kind of stress because you're a different person every day, and it takes, and maybe even every hour of every day you're playing a different role. It takes some real resilience to do that. What do you credit that to?
I mean, my wife Tiffany, like COVID actually helped. Like we never really spent much time together, and during COVID, the office was empty, and the two of us scootered around this 4,000 square foot space, just the two of us. I think having some sense of normalcy where you're not chasing another social activity, but you it's like forced focus, if that makes any sense,
Yeah, it
right?
does. Yeah,
I
yeah.
think I think that like stripping away some social activity that otherwise I wouldn't have had the discipline to do wasn't a realization that I don't know that I would have been able to make without COVID. So I'm not trying to say that
Mm,
like COVID was this like big luck thing for me, but it kind of was in a certain aspect of
sure.
showing me a different perspective, right?
Yeah.
Um, I also think there was like pain from mistakes. Our company was a successful consulting firm that was making lots of net profit, and of the three kind of leadership people that were there, one of them wanted to continue making money and didn't understand why I went from making money to not being able to make payroll sometimes.
Right.
Uh, Another one had no interest in doing consulting work, and I just didn't choose. I
Right.
thought that the choice would be made for me in a good way, and it was actually made for me in a bad way. I lost one of my best friends in the company,
Sure.
and actually I lost both of them. So I think a lot of the resilience has to do with just, okay, what do I do now that the support network of my friends in the company are gone?
Yep.
I think being forced to make the choice to do it really kind of enlightened myself into, oh, I actually really, really do want this. And
Yeah.
it helped kind of create future resilience, if that makes any sense.
It does. It totally makes sense because yeah, that transition is, yeah, you can't take everybody with you, right? On every journey, and being able to see the vision and be able to stick with it. It is painful, but that's where growth comes from, is from pain. I mean, I know a lot of people like to think, well, I could just go and get more educations and more degrees, and I'll have growth. But sometimes, it's facing those big challenges and saying, no, screw you, I'm pushing through this. Is huge. And then I think that resilience also translates, to be honest, being a founder, into that product and into the team. And I think it can create a better culture that way overall. Is there something where you feel like some secret sauce that you've had in terms of culture building that has really worked for you as a leader?
I think it translates from sales. I think
Okay.
one of the biggest things that I've seen in friends companies is that recruiting is hard. I mean, you spent, I
Yes.
don't know, 35 seconds in the beginning begging people
Uh,
to tell their friends
and
and
I'll
tell their
spend
uncles and
35
tell
seconds
whoever,
at
right?
the end
Yeah, right.
doing it again too.
It's really hard when it's hard to get good candidates, and then finding one that's really talented but doesn't fit and saying no. It's hard because you want to work with that person. It's hard because you don't know if there's anybody else out there.
Yeah.
But I think the only secret sauce we have is that I push the team, right or wrong. I don't know yet. Like, right now it feels right, but long term we don't know yet. But I pushed the team to interview 1,400 people to make the 30 offers we made
Wow.
to hire the 20 some people in
It's
our
a lot
seed
of
round,
work.
right? And at some point in time that's going to break down. But I think that um, there's no substitute for hard work. If you want the people that fit culturally, that are really, really good, I just don't know a recipe other than just do the work, right? So
Yep.
I
Yep.
think oftentimes we skip the secret sauce of hard work and grit. But for us, in terms of culture, that's what's made the biggest difference, is just having the commitment to keep doing the right thing.
Yeah, and that's a rare opportunity. I've brought this up to other people I've talked to before, is that, in my early career, I maybe would interview maybe 5 or 10 people in a year. And then I remember at one of the agencies before I ended up at Foundry, I mean, I was interviewing that many a week or a month, easy. And the more you get those interviews in, the more, not only do you get better at interviewing, the more you understand what you're actually looking for. And then the better you get at communicating what you're actually looking for. So I totally get where you're coming from. I can imagine by the time you were getting really into a rhythm with it, you were able to be very clear and very succinct in what success looked like at the organization. So while it might, again, back to the pain equals growth, it probably wasn't the most fun to chat with all those people and not know if that was going to be working out or not. And yeah, it's a hard process, but I totally get where you're coming from. And I think, again, that's a gift. It's a rare gift to be able to have that opportunity to talk to that many people, because you're bouncing your ideas off of them as well and getting feedback on what they think of your idea. So it's not just one way, right? Where you're, so I'm guessing you probably learned a lot during that process.
Yeah, for sure. And 1,400 people. The rule internally is if anybody applies and if we don't talk to them, they get a personal email. They don't get some template email back.
Yeah.
If they have if they have a face-to-face conversation and they're not a good fit, we're calling them and giving them a reason, what we think of them, and giving them something back. So
Give them
I think that
feedback.
even the people that we rejected, some of them referred their friends. We tried to make the process as human as possible, right? There's no substitute for human dignity, and it's a hard process, right? You don't
Yeah.
want this culture where people don't want to apply because they don't want to be rejected. I
Mm-hmm.
think that encouraging people to have this really rich, nice, warm, human, dignity centered experience helps that too, and that was hard. But I think what we learned about ourselves was um, that we actually really know what we like and what we don't. I
Yeah.
think before we started interviewing, there's this big question of what is culture, and it's not like any one candidate taught us something or told us anything. But at the end of hiring, I think all of us had a very specific understanding of what we wanted the culture to be without
Mm-hmm.
really even discussing it. So it created this like passive alignment, if you will, just by, oh, yeah, that's right. These are things that are important to us. This isn't just everywhere in the world. This is very special and different about who we are.
Mm-hmm.
Let's preserve that. So I think there was some value
Yeah.
there for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so let me get your side of this argument. I always hear it, especially in the VC world. Team or timing, right? Which is the most important, Sonny? Which one? What do you feel?
Well, they're interrelated because no amount of luck is, I mean, maybe you can make the argument with some really big companies that are out there that it was very, very lucky, but team is timing, right? The team that has the ability to work for a long time. Our core team's been together for 4 or 5 years now and still going strong, not close to burnout. At least I don't think so. I hope not. Um,
Not that they're
that,
telling you.
that's right. We're really like focused on that because
Yep.
the right team will stay along for the correct timing. And I would still say that we're maybe a little behind, maybe a little ahead. I don't actually know yet. It feels like we've timed it right, but we can't say that either because we spent 4 years fiddling around with stuff before we found the right thing. Part of that could be timing as well. So
Yeah, sure.
um, I would say that it's far more important to find a team that's interested and invested in what you're building instead of one that's like incredibly talented at the thing that you think you need to build right now. Because the people that believe, properly incentivized with equity and the right amount of pay and bonus structure, will do wonders for helping you withstand the unfavorable winds of luck as it relates to timing.
Yeah.
I think that is the mettle of the team that's more important than anything else. Is that have they been through something like that? And it doesn't have to be with software, but it could be with anything. It could be that they had to work a part-time job while going to law school, and the timing for a particular career wasn't right, and they were rewarded by having that grit to like persevere and finish something. So I think there are a lot of opportunities for us to find people that have had the experience of persevering through something that other people laughed at them about and getting rewarded by it. I
Mm,
think that's the temperament that you want to hire for. So
yeah.
I would say that the team's temperament is what allows you to survive improper timing, which you're just going to have no matter what.
I love that answer. Okay, let's get in my time machine and go in the future here for a minute. So just stick with me for this. So it's
Okay.
it's 10 months, 10 years from now. Sunny Fulcrum gets purchased for billions of dollars, and now you're going out and investing in other companies. And what is some of the first things some of the first advice or some of the first questions you're going to ask these new founders when they're first starting their businesses? What are some things that you personally, based on your experience, you kind of mentioned going back in time, but I'm going to go forward in time. And what are some of the things that you would give advice to early on in the beginning?
Man, so I think that no matter what, you're biased by your own experiences, and there's no way that I can tell if my advice is good because my experiences could just be lucky for the particular slice, right? But so I will say that all the things that I believe are important to me, I have no evidence are actually important. So I want to make sure that's clear to anybody that's listening.
All right,
Um,
caveats have been set.
uh, I would say that I would ask for any evidence that they have of themselves being industrious.
Mm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
what do you do when you're bored? If you're forced in a bored situation, what do you do? And I think industriousness can be trained. It's really difficult,
Yep.
but I would say like if there's anything you can do to increase your industriousness by motivation, you should be focusing on that really early on because that has snowballed for me for me, before I started the company, if anybody who knew me knew that on the weekends I slept in until like 11 in the morning. I hated morning
Sure.
meetings. I changed my entire degree class program in undergraduate just to not have
Yeah.
any morning classes.
Yep.
But
Yep.
really, it was the forcing function of saying, is this important enough for you to change who you actually are deep down inside? And
Mm.
the answer being yes. I wake up really early every day right now. Most days I'm in the office by 6 or 7. And even on weekends, I don't sleep in past 8 or 9. And I'm thinking about stuff right away. I don't look at my phone for half an hour when I wake up.
Yeah.
There's a lot of habits that if you knew me 5, 6 years ago, you'd be like, there is no way that this is the same person.
Not the same guy.
But I didn't make those choices voluntarily. I made the choice to make those choices voluntarily, if that makes any
Sure.
sense. So I think the advice I would give myself or somebody who's really early stages, have you truly made the decision that you're going to try this and be okay with failure? Because I think the answer to that question is
Mm.
very easily yes sometimes, but I think that if it doesn't go really deep down into the root of, you like to eat good food, you like to drink beer, whatever you read, the thing that defines your pleasure and comfort, can you get rid of that? Not all the other things that are easy to get rid of. Could you change that one really, really important thing about what you enjoy about your life? And I think the answer is no, oftentimes, and there's no shame in that. But I
Yep.
think that we should be honest with ourselves about that. So I think that's
Yeah.
one kind of big piece of advice that I would give.
Yeah. I think that, yeah, I think to your point about how invested are you going to be in its success? And again, there's no replacing hard work, team or timing, right? And I think you kind of mentioned it back to the team thing, is that you can have an excellent team, but if they don't have the right motivation, if they don't understand where they're going, and timing, if you're not educated enough in the space that you're going in, how can you know if the timing is right or not? So all those things take a lot of work, and I can
Absolutely.
imagine, you have to spend a lot of time just keeping up on the industry, not just even what's going on with your product, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And for me, I think it was I don't know if you grew up in Minnesota, but we had this book it
Oh yeah.
program where if you read, I think it was 3 books in a week, you get a free
Yep.
personal pan pizza. So I read a
Yes.
shitload of books. And so
Because you love
that
pizza.
has, I love pizza, and it made me ingest information faster. And I would say that that's another thing too, is that like you can work on reading faster and ingesting information faster. But you know, I've never owned a manufacturing facility. I've toured a bunch of them. I've worked with a bunch of them as clients.
Yep.
But I'm constantly paranoid that I don't know enough. No matter how much more I know than any particular customer or how much less I know than any particular person, I'm constantly saying, how can I be an actual expert in this space?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a lifelong journey, right?
Yeah.
I don't think that the expectation should be that you can achieve that in a year.
Yep. Right. But Ed, to your point, I mean, if you're delivering value, I mean, not only are you building those longer term relationships, but it's coming back into the vision for the product as well. And so it just keeps feeding the dream. So makes total sense to me. Sonny, I know you're busy. You're in New York, so I wanna let you go. But before I let you go, if I want to know more about Fulcrum and the work that you're doing there, where should I go and find more information? Oh, you froze on me. Oh no, 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 freeze, don't. Well, all right, we'll try to get Sonny back here in just a second. Hang on. Hang on. All right, we'll be right back with Sonny here. Once he might have to reconnect. So I want to say one thing, because I ask people about the team versus timing thing all the time, and I get tons of different answers. And I love what Sonny had to say about, you can't have one without the other. It's really hard to just have great timing and then have kind of a crappy team, So it doesn't make a lot of sense. All right, let's get Sonny back in here. Hang on one second. There he is. He's back. Let's see if I can hear
A
him.
lot.
Oh,
I'm
there
not.
he is.
I'm not sure what happened.
I don't know. Who knows? It's New York. The infrastructure's terrible. What are you gonna do? Well, thanks for jumping back on. All right. So before we take off, I just want to make sure that everybody knows how they can find you and knows about Fulcrum and where to find more information.
Yeah, I always invite anybody to email me directly, Sunny, like the weather, SUNNY at fulcrumpro.com. And you can check out the company at fulcrumpro.com. You can look at our grow page that tells about our seed funding at fulcrumpro.com/grow. It's not a public page, but you can go there to find out more about how we think about manufacturing and about culture. But those are probably the best ways to find out more about us.
Awesome. Sonny, thank you so much for taking the time. I learned a lot today. And yeah, I just appreciate you and the work that you're doing. So thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate you having me on the show.
Yeah. All right, everyone. As Sonny mentioned, hiring, yes, very important. Building a team, building an amazing team, which is what we are doing. And are you going to be a part of that amazing team? Maybe you are. Maybe somebody you know is going to be a part of that team. I don't know. I won't know until you go to this link up here and this URL and contact us. So do that, okay? Do me a favor and tell some friends. We'll see you next time. Thanks.